Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Thunderstock Show, a collection of valuable brainstorms to enhance your life, liberty, and pursuit of property. Today's special guest is Scott Krentzman. Scott, with CMIT Solutions, has obtained his MBA over 20 years ago. He's got a lifelong passion for technology. He's got engineering. He's kind of got it all. We're here to talk about how what you don't know can still hurt you in terms of cybersecurity, managed IT. Scott, how's it going? Where are you calling in from? How's the weather?
Hey, Ross. Great. Thanks for inviting me on the show. Appreciate it. It's looking forward to this discussion. How's it going? Well, the world's a risky place. We all know this, but some of these small to medium-sized business owners really don't necessarily understand the day-to-day risks that they're facing in the technology world, and either by intention or just focus on the business at hand, they miss out and don't understand the real risk that they've put themselves in.
Yeah, I want to dive into that. So I want to start off by asking you, what are some of the differences and risks between startup founders, small and mid-sized business, and these Fortune 100? Because as we all know, the world is it has a tense environment when it comes to war, and that conflict doesn't always look like it used to back in the Civil War, Revolutionary War, where people are out there in the middle of a field with cannons and red
Right
coats.
in front of you, 15 feet away, and
Yeah,
rock'em sock'em. Yeah,
not that anymore. It's more, oh,
it's
we can fly drones with technology, which maybe not the topic of this conversation, or we can do cyber attacks, which are probably on an increase amongst,
absolutely,
impending war.
absolutely.
So how does that look like for the everyday American or the small business owner?
Yeah, so listen, founders and startup people, listen, they're focused on trying to build the business and get new sales, build a structure, and be successful, right? So, but where does IT fall into that in the list of priorities of what you got to do? And it's going to vary depending on the kind of business that you're trying to run, but it still needs to be there. So I guess that would be the first item to just note. Uh, can't ignore it to zero. You can say it's a lower priority, but you got to be aware of it. Then when you've already grown and you're at a 10 to 20 person operation, well, then you've got a lot of people. They're using their computers in all kinds of places, whether it's in the office or maybe it's an all cloud-based infrastructure. And great, you don't need an office space, but you're connecting to the internet, and you've got corporate data all over the place, and people are manipulating it and using it. But gosh, what happens if somebody infiltrates that or poisons one of them? How do you prevent it from poisoning all and taking down the entire thing? And where is that in the management structure of how you think about the business at that stage of the business? And we can help people think through all of that. But there's a number of protections that you need to have if you're a cloud-based business, if you're work from home, if you're hybrid, if you're all in the office. There's all different kinds of solutions that can be customized to help protect you. Versus when you're at the Fortune 100, you've already made it to the top of the mountain, and now you're looking for even greater mountains and countries to conquer on top of that. Well, then you've got an even bigger infrastructure. And while we can help you if you want, there are also bigger
The,
players.
the Fortune 100 companies, yeah, it's a really interesting point you made, Scott. They're already at the top of the mountain so that everyone that may be trying to attack them is aware, right? If you're a publicly traded company, there's a high likelihood that that cyber attacker overseas, not naming any countries because I don't want to get flagged as a target myself, but they're aware of you, which means you probably have some sort of security or some sort of
Well, and
in-house IT.
and
So they may be
as
more braced for battle. Go ahead.
right. Well, and as a public company, the SEC now has required they have slowly but surely modernized that. So the SEC now has requirements for boards to take cybersecurity seriously. And they have to attest to the level of cybersecurity. There's already been local laws, like in Massachusetts. I'm based out of Boston, Massachusetts, here, but local laws in Massachusetts require everybody to file a WISP, Written Information Security Program.
Hmm.
Doesn't mean you've got the gold standard of protection. It just means that you've thought about IT and you've thought about technology and protections and you've made it relevant and you've written it down.
Wait, that rule applies to all businesses in Boston?
That rule applies to all businesses in Massachusetts and any company doing business in Massachusetts. Even if you touch a business in Massachusetts, you need to have a WISP. In
Well, I'll be honest, Scott. I don't mean to cut you off, brother, but I am not familiar with the term WISP. And it goes back to the concept that what you don't know can hurt you, because even if you don't get a cyber attack, if there was some sort of government body who is investigating your business, like looking into it, and you don't have one, you're liable for that. And you don't
well,
even know.
exactly. And so let's take it to being within a Massachusetts business. Say you're a Massachusetts business that somehow deals with personally identifiable information, or you
Sure.
got credit card information. And listen, it's important, but you may not have taken it seriously enough either on your cyber protection front, which leaves you open on a certain way. But if you haven't even done the WISP, for example, which is just a simple legal document, it is not a major effort to go through this, but you need to have it. God forbid you had an event that caused harm and the public authorities had to investigate and they saw, well, in addition, you didn't have a WISP, well, you could be criminally liable for that too. So, there's all kinds of things that come to play here.
There you go.
That's not meant to scare you
But it's
unnecessarily,
scary.
but these exist. So you've just
Yeah.
got to be aware of what's relevant to you.
So I want to go back to that point because a lot of people that listen, they're SMB entrepreneurs or they're aspiring to be an SMB entrepreneur. Yeah, that's this stage they're at. We're not. I would venture forth and say most of the people that would check this podcast out are not Fortune 100 executives, and they're covered on the list. I'm going to assume with good faith they're fine. But the people I talk to, I talk all out about. You may have a business idea if you want to get started. You may have product market fit. You might have a valuable skill or service you can provide in the market. Great, you need that. Then technically you need to go and register with the state. So you probably need an EIN, and then you need to get your formation documents, whether that's an LLC or whatever formation it is. Then you probably should get a bank account so that you can transact business, right? Like all these things, people
Absolutely.
are kind of general awareness, like they
Yep.
know. So like, is that when you get your WISP too in the beginning in the
Yes.
formation? Like you might as well just do it, get
So
away with right
certainly
away.
start there, and then as the business grows, from stage to stage, it may get different when you've grown, or you add different products into your mix, or you then change the structure by which how you're doing things. Maybe you used to use a cloud-based solution, but now you're bigger and you want more control, so you went with an on-prem solution where your data is controlled within your environment. Well, then you need to adapt the WISP to reflect what your new computing architecture is at
That's
that.
an interesting angle because I've worked with businesses that rely on ERP. So for those listening to know what ERP is, Enterprise Resource Planning Software, it's essentially your everything software if you do like wholesale, distribution, warehousing, thing. Other industries needed too, right? It's your accounting, it's this,
Yes,
that, the other.
core,
So
right.
but essentially what you're saying is on-prem, there's pros and cons in the lens of security because on-prem it's locked down, it's on site. You can have somebody physically come in and they can, like someone like yourself or your company, CMIT, can sort of manage it all. All the cats are in the basket, all the
Right.
puppies are in the basket.
You
But
know
once you
where it
go
can touch it.
once you go cloud-based, there's an element of convenience. You can have people working in Arkansas and Alabama and California, all over the country. However, then you have Pandora's box of liability and other things that could occur. How do you interact with business system softwares like ERPs and evaluate risk and evaluate where there might be
So,
potential
so as a
pitfalls.
managed service provider, we're about providing the infrastructure that supports their business application. So we don't specifically manage their business application, but we interact with the client to understand what does their business application do, what kind of data does it have, and what then, therefore, what kind of risk does that pose, and who's accepting the risk. The application, if you're using the Oracle database from an Oracle ERP solution, well, you got to understand, who's accepting the risk in your service contract. Does that fall on you, the client, or does that fall on them, the provider? And so you just need to be aware of these things.
So I want to take a step back and say you've had your MBA now for 20 years. What
Over.
was your journey like coming to this point? What did you, when you were in school growing up, what did you see yourself doing?
Well, I'll tell you, even so, I'll start. I'll jump in a little bit earlier. In school, I got an engineering degree, electrical engineering, and I practiced electrical engineering for a number of years. And even before getting to that, I went into engineering because back when I was 11 years old, Radio Shack created the Model 1 Tandy computer. Uh,
Hmm.
and I had that and taught myself BASIC. At first, I imagined it would take up my entire dining room to have a computer, but here it was sitting on my desktop at age 11. That was like
That's
super
cool.
duper powerful back in the day. And so I then thought I wanted to be an engineer, and that was
Hmm.
great. So I went into engineering, did that for a while, but over the course of time, I realized, being on the business side of things would be even better. So that changeover was, well, how do we then apply some of the engineering structure to going into the business world? And it's been very beneficial to have that as the background. And I've worked in a number of tech companies, as it turns out, not by trying. And I never imagined being in an IT world. That was, unimaginable. Uh,
How'd you get introduced to the IT world? Obviously, you had the passion for technology. It seems like at the time, electrical engineering and the IT majors of today probably had much crossover.
Yeah,
Um,
it's really interesting. My father was a small business consultant, so he was working with all different types of entrepreneurial companies of various sizes back in the day, from several 100,000 to 50 million. Which back in the years ago, those were pretty
Huge.
pretty big companies at the
That's
time.
not a, that's not a small business.
But he worked with a number of different companies, so I saw
Mhm.
the entrepreneurialness of that, and so that always played in the back of my head.
It's
And
almost in your DNA.
well, it was, and doing different things. And so finding IT, though, really wasn't a natural thought. After my MBA, I worked in large companies for a while. I had some health issues, so I had to take some time off. And when it was time to get back in the game again, I realized, I was too old to do the startup routine. I couldn't do 100-hour weeks. I had
No,
three, four kids, it just, I can't do that. At the same time, I realized I couldn't be, employee number 1,975 at somebody else's large company, punching a clock.
mm.
That was not going to be challenging enough. So eventually I found, some franchise broker who bumped into me. And even with that, I wasn't looking at technology. I was looking at what you'd consider as franchise things. Now, I must admit, I never knew about franchises either, and that's even through business school. But, my
Hmm.
concept of franchises was Burger King and Dunkin' Donuts, and I knew I wasn't going to do food. So, but they introduced me to a variety of things. And then eventually my wife said, well, geez, you've got all this background in technology. Why don't you take some, find something in the technology space? And the franchise broker said, well, there is one. Well, great. And I found CMIT Solutions, and it's been a perfect mix of where I get to do the entrepreneurial things. I get to build my own business while helping other people build their business. Yet I'm both small and large at the same time, and I get to help people grow. So it's just a beautiful combination.
Scott, I love a couple of things about that story, and I'm going to point out some of the key details. I'm a big pattern recognition fan. One, seems like family influence has really shaped between what your professional passions and interests and skill set are, but it also seems like you're a pretty compassionate guy with your family. Between your father, the inspiration of his career path and how it affected you, between you having the foresight and wisdom to choose the right path for where you were at in life. Trust me, this gray hair, my beard here didn't happen without lots of stress from startup hours. You know, that I also made a career transition based on where my family was at the time and understanding what I could actually do to live the
Mhm.
best wholesome integrated life. So I appreciate that. And then isn't it funny how sometimes our wives have these like nuggets of advice that just like
Well,
really
push,
push you in the right direction, huh?
right.
So it's cool that you got to where you're at largely in part with your own career interests, but also listening to your family and keeping them in the forethought of your mind. I also want to dive into the franchise story you had because it's just so top of mind, interesting to me. I think that people, like you said, have this strange perception of franchises as Dunkin' Donuts and Burger King and fast food, and you're like, not for me. I'm sure there's
Right,
someone out there that's great for, but your brain, the way it works with both the IT and engineering with systems, franchises are great. You like systems, you build systems, you follow the process. Like
right.
franchises provide value to people that want to get into business ownership by helping them with systems. Huge plus. And then you get the opportunity to own your own business. So you're scratching the entrepreneurial itch. Another check mark right there. And finally, with what you do at CMIT, you have a larger network of, there's it's established business. CMIT is kind of huge as far as the umbrella,
Yep,
but then you get to
yep.
have your own piece of that and you make your own footprint, and you get to help the small business, and you have access to large business. So it really sounds like your journey was the right one, and it's cool to hear the story. That's what I'll say about it.
Yeah, thank you. No, I feel blessed to have come across it and, somehow found the way to make the right choices to be in this position.
So now I'm going to ask you a couple of high level, bigger picture questions on business and growth. I think I think a lot of businesses, speaking from my marketing perspective, are so focused on what I call top line growth or the positives of business. How do we get more customers? How do we make them stay longer? How do we make them worth more? Where's our leads coming in? Close rate, yada 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 yada. They're really concerned about growth. But what they don't usually take the time on, because it may be perceived as less sexy or boring or not in their purview, is how do I mitigate risk? So, can you give me some stories or examples of how risk mitigation, cybersecurity, compliance enables business growth? Because they're not antithetical. They're kind of
Yeah, so
you can't have one without the other.
right. Our objective here is to help people not just see IT as a cost center, but see it as an enabler to the business. And that comes across in a variety of ways. If you want to have a remote workforce, that's great. That does enable the business. But to have that workforce not provide added risk takes some additional thought and some additional protections. And we can do that and make it so that you can add people wherever in the world that you want to add them, but that they can all contribute safely to the system and not provide extra risk to it. So simple things such as that are ways that we help turn that equation around from oh, well, I need somebody to provide me the licenses, so I'll let you do it, or I'll only call on help when something breaks. I don't need ongoing assistance. It's just the reverse. if something breaks, that means somebody's got some downtime and they're twiddling their thumbs until somebody gets around to it. And maybe whoever you've got, to call doesn't respond immediately. So it's even worse. Whereas with
Mm.
us, we're about proactive prevention of problems, trying to look ahead on this. And we have, for all kinds of business sizes and types. So if you're at the low end and you're not dealing with confidential information, you're just running your painting business,
Yeah,
for
painter,
for for,
plumber, blue
for
collar
example.
service business,
Right.
right?
You're just running your basic business, but I need to know that my systems are available and that if I have a problem, you're preventing bad things from happening. So you got all the basics in place. You're preventing, bad things from shutting us down. And if somebody's got a problem, well, there's somebody to call at the other end that's going to answer the phone and already knows how to get into your systems, already knows the applications you got, has the passwords so that they can facilitate quick repairs so that the downtime is to a minimum if you have to have any at all. Whereas on the, other companies say you're a healthcare provider, you're a doctor's office, and you've got HIPAA requirements where that's very severe in terms of meeting that compliance standard, and you just want to serve your patients. So you need the data there when you need the data. You can't, have a problem accessing it. Your networks have to be reliable. You have to have backups to your networks in case something goes down with the primary. Well, somebody's got to have thought that through, and we help people do all of that. Again, which turns around the equation from well, it broke and now everybody's at standstill, to let's plan ahead. There will be a problem. Let's mitigate as many of those risks as we possibly can. And that's what we help with.
We're sort of dancing around this question, but I'm just going to ask it bluntly. What are the consequences? What are some stats and figures around what happens after the fallout
Yeah.
of a
So,
small business getting cyber attacked? And that, like, what they might say, oh, there's some risk, like, whatever. I drive my
well,
car every
first,
day and blah blah blah. But like, what does it really feel like in tangible reality that,
I'll give you some tales from the front line. From the front line, I can't tell you how many business owners I speak to that says, but I'm a small business. Nobody's interested in me. And to a certain level, you're right. They're not interested in you and what you have. The problem there is what you have is of value to you. So that if they
mm,
stop you, well, it doesn't cost them anything. It costs you everything. So you need to be defensive, and you are the target. You need to be aware that that's important. So
yeah, it's
so
almost like
there's
kidnapping, but with your business being the child.
that's correct. And your child's important to you. It may not be important to anybody else, but your child's
Yeah,
important to you.
yeah.
So that's important. So the other piece is 60% of small to medium-sized businesses don't survive 6 months after the attack. They're not target. They don't have infinite cash flow, bankers that are willing to extend them extra loans to cover the hump to get from fixing the problem to going forward. When you're a small to medium-sized business, cash flow is king. When your customers hear that you've been hacked, let alone your employees, and what that means, it just eats at the soul of a business.
It's almost like getting into a health event without having insurance.
Well, that's right. And
You
I can't
know,
tell you the number of people that still don't have cyber insurance. And
yeah,
now, cyber insurance. Plus, in the old days, they used to issue cyber insurance policies like throwing out candy. Now they actually are testing to see that, geez, if we're going to issue a cyber policy, maybe you should have some basic cyber protections in place. So it's these are all part of the envelope of what a small business owner needs to know.
so I think it's interesting to me the intersection between the pain point, the consequences, and the downside. But what are some of the things that you look for in your relationships with clients? Like, what are some of your philosophies on growing and running this business you have? Because
Well,
I would assume that your goal is not to be like Target, where it's like we've got a shelves full of goods and anyone come on in and buy and be our customer. There's got to be some sort of criteria. So what do you look for in a customer?
in terms, are you talking about on a human basis, or are you talking on a technical basis?
Probably in a human basis. Like who's a good psycho profile for who you want to work with?
Well, first of all, somebody who's aware. So it just starts with basic awareness. I can't make you aware. I can tell you the example of I actually visited a prospect who was literally an insurance agent. He runs an insurance agency. His business is selling, home and auto insurance to people. And so that's his business. And he invited me in to talk to him. And one of the questions was, what are you doing for cybersecurity? His response to me was, well, I've been in business 15 years. I haven't had an event, so I'm not doing anything. I
Hmm.
said, it was a pleasure to meet you. Have a nice day. Um,
Hmm.
if an insurance agent is not aware who sells insurance to everybody, for bad things do happen, there was no amount of awareness that I was going to generate for him to say you need to have cyber in, some kind of layers of cyber protection in place for your business. So
It's funny to me for two reasons. One, you'd think that insurance professionals and probably legal firms would be the most aware of like mitigating downside risk, right? Because that's their
right,
job. That's their job
right.
for others, which is makes that story funny to me. But the other thing that makes it funny to me is the analogy of you said before becoming aware. Insurance in the marketing advertising space is one of the industries that spends the most on marketing
Yeah, yeah,
advertising.
yeah, yeah.
Their whole thing, like they're sort of advertisers. Like they need to get in front of people to make them aware to. So in my mind, your business is interesting because it's not like you can run a Super Bowl ad for CMIT necessarily.
Right.
Maybe they can, but I'm not suggesting that they do. This is not
I
marketing
wouldn't be
advice.
expecting that anytime soon.
Yeah, but you guys kind of have a similar locus of pain for growing your business where there is that element that you have to educate and you have to make aware to some degree because you know it it affects every small business,
Which is why
obviously.
we're having this conversation,
Right.
because
Oh, right.
education is the key here, which is the starting point of awareness. Oh, I mean, is it really real? I mean, even some people that get touched by it don't don't feel the pain enough. The pain level has to rise enough that they're aware of it. So I start with awareness makes it easier to have the relationship. And this we have the keys to the castle. When you partner with CMIT or really any managed service provider, they have access to your systems. I mean, at least one person would be able to have the core passwords and the credentials to access things. So there's a degree of trust that has to be earned as part of this process. And so we are all about building that trust and showing them what we can do and how we do it, and what are protections that we have in place, from a priority standpoint, and then how we help protect them from both the external world as well as the internal world. Because, for as much as there's hackers out there, there's internal consequences from, bad actors that you might have internally, or just accidents that happen. Somebody
Well,
accidentally deleted, the core business file. They didn't mean to do it, but they did it. Do you
I
want a backup? Are
I
you sure your backup exists?
let me tell you something about ERP. I had this conversation yesterday and I had flashbacks to some pain points. The the amount of devastation that an ERP transition can cause in a small business is is paramount. And if you don't have a tech partner and you just say, "Oh, our team's smart, they can figure it out." I worked with a business, not going to say who it was, that switched from an on-prem to a cloud-based ERP. And they said no to like the transition IT managed service
Assistance.
provider
Yeah. Yeah.
assistance.
Yeah.
And I'll just tell you that business was not tech centric. Like they were still using a typewriter to manually write out 1099s, and this was not that long ago. And they were taking Excel spreadsheets and printing them out with a ruler and pencil and like making adjustments, then have someone do data entry versus like typing on a screen. Like that's the type of thing. So the reason I bring this situation up is they had people who had no business with admin control of the new ERP that were continually making manual adjustments and just causing errors over and over again. So that ERP implementation, it probably took 2.5 years, like 30 months. And the amount of loss was incalculable between lost downtime and things like that. Where had they just hired a professional, probably would have been 9 to 12 months, probably
Yeah.
would have
Cut
been
it in
fully
half.
trained, what
Yeah.
probably would have had the right user roles and systems and break fixes in place where they couldn't have broken things, right?
Right.
So that's just one example that I think if people understood, if they took it seriously, like you're talking about millions and millions of dollars of lost potential by just not spending a couple, maybe $100,000. Like
Right.
most people, if even if they're not investors, can understand that if I were to give Scott $1 and he could say, "Hey, your chances of getting $10 back are way higher," it's probably a good deal. And you just add some zeros, and that's kind of the reality of the situation.
Right. Exactly. I mean, and that's the kind of leverage we want to be able to give our clients is to, let them know that they're protected and they can do what they need to do to grow their business. One of our taglines is we take the worry out of IT. You grow your business, we'll worry about everything behind the scenes on the
Yeah.
IT side.
Well, I love talking about the business part, but I want to ask you one final question, and it is if you could accomplish one goal between now and the end of the day, not just today, but I'm talking about retirement or before you die, before your time on Earth is over, what is like the domino you want to push over? What's the one thing you want to accomplish?
One thing I want to accomplish. Um, I just enjoy helping people grow. What being a part of growth is like somehow it's very nurturing internally to me. I don't imagine I'll ever retire. I mean, retire to zero and maybe retire to low, but I don't think it'll ever get to zero. And part of that is just seeing growth. And so, the focus on, helping people grow their businesses uh, just provides a lot of nourishment. So I guess I got to go with that.
Very cool. Well, we're coming to the head at this conversation. Scott, I appreciate you coming on. Last question is not so deep. Where can people find you? How can people get in touch with you?
Yes, so we've got a website, cmitsolutions.com/BNW is the direct way to get to my website within the overall franchise system. You can always reach me by phone at 617-221-4100 and by email at skrentzman, SKRENTZMAN at CMIT Solutions.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. Everyone listening, I don't run ads in the show. I don't plan to. My only ask is if you enjoyed it, share it with a friend so that they can benefit. For now, take care.
Thanks, Ross.